It is easy to forget the nature of man, and though we stroll amidst a mirage of the complexity of our creations, one truth remains. We are but walking beasts, and beast we shall remain. Yet, this innate bestial roar is overshadowed by our greatest gift, reason and logic, making our existence the ultimate oxymoron, the philosophical animal. And this ever-growing battle between beast and philosopher is what has shaped the world as we know it today. We have built great civilizations, yet all of them have fallen due to our corruption. We have nearly mastered the secrets of the formation of matter itself. And now we are but a button away to annihilate life as we know it. We are a species filled with compassion, yet cruelty is far too common to dismiss. Few artists have been able to capture the intricate duality of our existence, and one of them is Stephen King, whose twisted and dark stories have amazed and horrified the literary world ever since his name came to our bookstores. There has been a few films who have tried to capture the obscurity of his words into the silver screen. Some have failed, and some have succeeded. And today, we will have an in-depth look at the Netflix exclusive film, Gerald's Game, that takes us on a journey inside the mind of a disturbed woman in the brink of death and her struggle to survive while unearthing painful secrets of her past. So, sit back and relax, because we are going to explore the hidden meaning behind Gerald's Game. This all starts with what essentially is a pretty neat romantic getaway, where an older couple are simply trying to spend some time together and spark their passions after years of a monotonous marriage. Jessie, the timid and soft-spoken wife, and her husband Gerald, a cutthroat lawyer, despite their problems, decides to take a trip to their beach house and revive their yearning for one another. It begins pretty innocently, with Jessie nervously awaiting for her husband in bed, and Gerald going out of his way to make sure everything is perfect. However, this tender moment between the two of them turns sour once Gerald handcuffs Jessie to the bed, where she's trying to play along until things get too far for her. She begs Gerald to remove the handcuffs, but he seems unwilling to do so. They start arguing, and Gerald suddenly suffers from a massive heart attack, falls over the bed, and his skull is cracked open. Trapped and terrified, Jessie starts screaming for help, but the only thing that catches her attention is a stray dog they came across on their way to this place. The dog starts to devour Gerald, and she has a mental breakdown where she relieves the most traumatic event in her life, where her father sexually assaulted her when she was only 12 years old. Jessie, struggling to distinguish between fantasy and reality, starts having visions of a macabre being that stalks her during the night. She endures for a couple of days in this delirious state, where she is haunted in her dreams, being tormented by the dog at day, and the ghastly entity during her nights. Just before her body shuts down, she comes to closure with her past, and finds a way to break free from her shackles. Nearly amputating her arm, she is greeted by this ghoul, who she calls Moonman, and she gives it her wedding ring as a toll for her passage to life. On her way to the hospital, she has a vision of this spectre and crashes her vehicle. She wakes up in a hospital soon after and receives a large settlement from her husband's life insurance. She uses this money to open up a shelter for children who are the victims of sexual assault. Despite her breakthrough, her traumas still haunt her, and she comes to terms that this darkness will never abandon her. Later, she finds out in a newspaper that the moonman was no fiend or apparition. In fact, he was a man who suffered from a severe deformity and was a necrophiliac cannibal who started robbing graves years past, but eventually graduated to murder. Jessie decides to confront this wretch of a man during his trial, and fearlessly walks out of the courtroom a new woman. Behind the gory scenes and the gruesome imagery, this film addresses a rather grim subject, and that is the loss of innocence. It is absolutely terrifying that a single event in your life could potentially shape your entire personality. And it is petrifying to know that an emotional scar can devoid you from the most fundamental human necessity: connection. Though Jessie's bondage and psychological torture may be the scare factor of the film, the true terror comes from the realization that Jessie has been living a lie all her life, and that she is but a facade of herself. And because of her inability to share this deep secret of hers, she has no true friends, family, or love, making her even doubt if it's worth to escape her dreadful fate in that secluded bedroom. Jessie, at her core, is incomplete, and she never truly escaped that grisly day at her father's beach house. At the age of 12, she had only but a glimpse of her adolescence, yet the transition between child and woman was ripped away from her, and on that day, her childhood died and womanhood became a synonym with danger, predation, and solitude. And as she grew older, this fundamental bond between sexuality and security became a warped notion that defined her approach with anyone she interacted with. The subconscious craves safety and familiarity, and sometimes, when these things do not align, it chooses to follow the latter. And this explains why she was drawn to someone with the character traits of her husband. Just like her dad, Gerald is an older and very opulent man who has made an entire career as a lawyer, combing his skills for rhetoric, logic, and manipulation. At first glance, it seems that she's repeating the cycle of her trauma and reliving the marriage of her parents. But if you look closer, this is not exactly what's going on. Sure, the similarities between Gerald and her father seem too overwhelming to think otherwise. But Jessie, unlike her mother, never had children with Gerald. Probably because she may have suspected that he had a well-concealed dark side. After all, he almost raped his own wife. After the incident with her father, Jessie was never the same. Her role as an innocent child entering maturity morphed into an isolated and dispassionate protector. She had seen the monster inside her dad, and now it was her role and her duty to protect her siblings against the evil nature of her father. And to this day, she is subconsciously still playing this role. Only this time, she's protecting her hypothetical children against the man she married. And although it may sound illogical and far-fetched, Jessie, by refusing to give children to her husband, is trying to somehow fix the mistakes of her mother. This is a way for her to correct the trauma of her past, and by sacrificing herself, she believes that she's amending the wrong that was done to her as a child. And her role as a protector did not cease after she escaped the beach house. By opening this shelter for children who were the victims of sexual abuse, she solidified and came to terms that this was her purpose in life. However, this realization may have brought her closure, but no joy. After all, she departed with something that was very dear to her: her infancy. This is what Jessie has craved all her life, to be the innocent and free-spirited girl she once was. And this fervent yearning manifested itself when she was but a few seconds away from her death. Unlike her visions of her husband had suggested, her last thoughts were not of true terror or fulminating anxiety. It was a soothing and melancholic song, a haunting lullaby that barely escaped her vocal cords, a last cry for what could have been, a requiem for her lost childhood. Another constant theme portrayed throughout the film is the perversion of mankind. The story, after all, is centered around Jessie's sexual exploitation and the perverse nature of the men around her. Stephen King has masterfully encapsulated the claustrophobic perception of a woman distraught by the depravity of her father. Jessie's view of man has been radically distorted, and it is no coincidence that this grotesque shell of a man plays such an integral part in the narrative. The Moonman is perhaps the perfect depiction of the ultimate depravity of mankind. He virtually violates all of which we hold sacred. He is a murderer, a necrophiliac, a cannibal, and a thief. And it is more than appropriate that these sinister characteristics are embodied by such a puke-inducing exterior. Yet, it is not him who truly terrifies Jessie, but her visions of him. A few times throughout the film, during and after her predicament at the cottage, she has some ghastly visions of this man. And in all of them, his eyes are glowing with a red as intense as the depths of a volcano. But the color of his eyes are a reflection of the eclipse she eagerly anticipated before her father robbed her of her innocence. Hence, she views the Moonman as an extension of her father. This is even clearer when at the end of the film she confronts this overgrown ghoul, and she sees him as himself, her father, and her husband. This crucial piece of imagery is proof of her fractured conception of what a man is or is supposed to be. This goes back to the fundamental duality of the male psyche, and although women are also suspect to this truth, it is men who wrestle more fiercely with this dichotomy: the protector and the destructor. Jessie throughout her childhood adored her father. He was the provider and the protector of the family, and in an instant, seemingly out of nowhere, the protector became the aggressor, and permanently blurred the lines in her subconscious between these two. Hence, in her mind there was no distinction between men. All of them, no matter how virtuous they may appear outwardly, at their core there will always be that beast lurking, and looking for an opportunity to be unleashed. And, as a result of this, in her mind, Gerald and the Moonman are one of the same. Which, by any objective measure, is clearly untrue. Gerald's sexual fantasies, although a little risque, are trifled by the grotesque activities of the Moonman. Heck, it could be argued that the depravity of her father is but a pebble against the boulder of evil that this man represents. But, despite all of this, she can't make a distinction between them, because that is how she survived the rest of her youth with her family. And this is what has kept her safe ever since, and unfortunately for her, this primal need for safety has left nothing but a void. a part of her that will never be filled. The eclipse is the most poignant symbol in the film. The scarlet red inundating the endless sky is a powerful use of imagery that cements a feeling of awe and dread in the deepest sections of your mind. And this feeling is more than appropriate, as Jessie herself is still haunted by this freak occurrence of nature. And typically in literature, an eclipse is the primordial symbol for the conscience being overpowered by a primitive drive outside the realm of the ordinary. And well, here the eclipse is used fittingly, as Jessie's father is subdued by his degeneracy in the midst of the eclipse. But it could also portray something far more obscure, and that is the deafening silence that Jessie and everyone around her willingly partook in. The sun could be interpreted as the unadulterated truth, where no crook or crick are untouched by its powerful rays, and the moon quite literally impending the truth to be unveiled. And it is no coincidence that Jessie's dreams are constantly about the eclipse, since her silence and the deliberate ignorance of those around her has defined her as an individual. Although Jessie is partially responsible for her reluctance to speak about her trauma as an adult, it is the obligation of her quote-unquote loved ones around her to have inquired about her muted suffering. However, she learned rather quickly from her own mother that the truth was so vile and disgraceful that even thinking about it was intolerable. And her mother decides to protect this shameful truth and keep her family's reputation untarnished in the eyes of the world, breaking and betraying her daughter's heart in the process, and condemning her to live her entire life in the darkest and most desolate depths of the eclipse. Though we already have discussed how the moonman is the encapsulation of the evil nature of man, there is a lot more to unpack. Some say that he is the symbol of death and the impending demise of our protagonist, but I believe he's so much more than that. First, it's interesting in how he is essentially just going about digging graves and stealing bones and jewelry from the deceased. He is quite literally some nightmare-stricken collector with a morbid curiosity. Taking jewelry is somewhat sensible. After all, they have some monetary value. But why take the bones? Well, I believe that the moonman symbolizes the residual effects of a traumatized history. There's a crucial line of dialogue that brings some light on what this could represent.
They won't notice that one of your bones, not an important one, third phalange in your right foot, let's say, is also gone.
They won't notice that the wedding ring or one of her bones will be gone. This one line strikes at the core of what the moonman does. He takes the most valuable thing that his victim possesses, in Jessie's case, her wedding ring. By doing so, metaphorically, he's depriving her of one of the most fundamental joys in human experience, the ability to love and be loved. And by taking one of your bones, a fundamental part of your structure as a human being, disrupting your individuality subtly enough for no one else to notice or care to notice, making you appear normal, while faintly crumbling inside by the missing part in you. It's hard to believe that the evil in humans could reach this far. And evil is not known for its courageous strides. It prays for those who are the weakest among us, and that, unfortunately, are children. Authors like King are but a handful of writers who truly understand that the darkness of humanity is nearly limitless. And as disturbing as some of his works are, they're crucial for illuminating the masses to the obscurity of this truth. Just like in Gerald's game, most victims of abuse are bound by a staggering sense of guilt and shame. And along those self-inflicting psychological wounds comes silence. And silence is what buries these traumas, but at the cost of ourselves being entombed in a sepulchre that will be unmarked, forgotten, and forsaken. Thank you guys for watching. Remember to share, like, and subscribe. Check out my previous videos if you like this one. Let me know what you thought about Gerald's game in the comments down below. I'll be sure to read them all. Thanks again, and see you next week.